Chapter 15 of Mark then. Mark tells us that early that morning the chief priests with the elders and scribes and the whole council, or Sanhedrin, immediately held a consultation, and binding Jesus, they led Jesus away and delivered him to Pilate, in Mark 15, verse 1. Yarbrough Collins comments that this delivering of Jesus, or handing over, evokes Isaiah 53:12, according to which the servant of the Lord is handed over to death. Further, the handing of Jesus over to Pilate by the chief priests here fulfills the next part of the most detailed prediction of the Passion, Mark 10:33, and they will hand him over to the nations. The leaders of Israel's ninth battle rejoined motif continues against Jesus. They need to arrange his death, and they intend that Pilate, the Roman governor, representing the empire that is ruling all nations at the time, should do it. Yarbrough Collins notes, the council had no jurisdiction over capital cases. Only the Roman governor had authority to impose the death sentence. Pilate questions Jesus, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" in Mark 15, verse 2, and Jesus replies, "It is as you say." With this affirmation, Jesus declares his lordship over Israel a second time, now to the Roman governor, the representative of the nations. Immediately, the chief priests begin to accuse Jesus harshly of many things, but he answers nothing, in Mark 15, verse 3. In response, Pilate questions Jesus again, saying, "Do you not answer? See how many charges they bring against you," in verse 4. But Jesus makes no further answer, so that Pilate's amazed, in verse 5. And apart from successful fulfillment of prophecy, and so the Father's will, there's another critical victory in this for Jesus, as becomes clear in the following verses, which is inversive and subversive myth culture's expectation, in that Pilate openly recognizes the legitimacy of Jesus' claim, or pretends to for political ends at this point, while also recognizing the illegitimacy of Israel's religio-political leaders' motives for condemning Jesus. The upshot is a public declaration by Pilate of Jesus' kingship, a dispersive display for all to see and hear. Rome acknowledges Jesus as the King of Israel. Mark says that at the feast of Passover, the first daylight period of the first day of which is just now beginning, Pilate has a habit of releasing one prisoner to the people of Israel, whomever they request, in verse 6. He then tells us, Mark does, that at the time Pilate is holding a man named Barabbas, who had been imprisoned with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the insurrection, in verse 7. So this is a murderer. Expecting Pilate to keep his custom of releasing a prisoner, the people of Israel, who are there for the feast of Passover and unleavened bread, started crying aloud and began asking Pilate to do as he had been accustomed to do for them, in verse 8. Pilate expects the people to ask for, and evidently desires himself to perform, the release of Jesus. So he answers the people by saying, "Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" referring to Jesus, for Pilate was aware that the chief priests had handed Jesus over because of envy. That's Mark 15, verses 9 to 10. And Yarbrough Collins observes, this explanation implies that Pilate expected the people to ask for Jesus. The envy of the chief priests is due to Jesus' popularity with the crowd. This is a victory for Jesus, that Pilate acknowledges Jesus as King of Israel and acknowledges the false accusations of the tenant farmers of Israel out of envy for the Lord's possession of Israel, that he has the love of the people, and also is to inherit the kingdom, right? And they would no longer have their ill-gotten power. But Mark tells us that the chief priests stir up the crowd against the Lord Jesus in verse 11, continuing their battle rejoined against the Lord Jesus and against God himself. Yarbrough Collins suspects it may even be implied that the chief priests organized the crowd so that they would ask for Barabbas. The chief priests encouraged the crowd to ask Pilate to release Barabbas for them instead, in verse 11. Pilate responds by again asking them about Jesus, saying, "Then what shall I do with him whom you call the King of the Jews?" in verse 12, and the people shout back, "Crucify him," in verse 13. Pilate asks a third time, more pointedly, why? What evil has he done? In verse 14, and the people shout all the more, "Crucify him." The leadership of Israel has convinced the people to join them in condemning Jesus to death. The Roman governor Pilate will do their bidding, as is his custom. Yarbrough Collins concludes it's striking that the sentence of Jesus' crucifixion is determined here by the crowd and not by Pilate, who as governor was the only person with the authority to pass such a sentence at the time. Pilate's question in verse 14, "What evil has he done?" is a clear indication that Pilate believed Jesus to be innocent and that he ought to have been released. Yet Jesus' opponents have now had a successful ninth battle rejoined motif in keeping with both the sequence and significance of myth culture. Jesus himself has not, but rather has enjoyed an inversive and subversive ninth victory motif, fulfilling the Father's will and being declared the King of Israel, it's certainly not a mythological victory for Jesus, either the timing or the nature of it. Leading the nation along with them, the religio-political leaders of Israel have begun enjoying the fifth satiation episode on Jesus, their scapegoat, beating, mocking, accusing, and condemning him to death. At the same time, Jesus has been engaging in his fifth divine dispersive display episode, dispersing himself and displaying himself for the whole Sanhedrin, the fig tree, for the whole crowd, the vineyard of Israel, and for all nations, the Romans, to see Jesus the Lord, the King of Israel, King of the universe.